God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Well, today we are hearing from the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah's kind of amazing. He had one of the longest careers as a prophet, 40 years. And his prophecy was through the reign of the last 4 kings of Judah. Jeremiah lived in the worst of times. Terrible times, dark times. He watched and saw Jerusalem disintegrate into chaos and be looted by Babylon. And he and those who survived were carried off as slaves into exile. It always reminds me that Jeremiah was so faithful to God. And sometimes we have this kind of popular thinking today that says that faith is, just simply positive thinking, and that if we just try to be positive as Christians, then we can create a wonderful life for ourselves. But the Bible also shows us that people of faith, deep faith, don't always have it like that. Sometimes there is suffering and persecution and loss. And it's a reminder that our faith is not just self-serving. It's not like we have faith so that we're going to have a nice life. But our faith is about living with God through all the things that happen. In his day, Jeremiah was not a popular person. He said things that God told him to say that shocked and disturbed and irritated people and kings. And he was known for his vivid theatrics. He once put on an ox yoke over his shoulders and paraded around Jerusalem, warning people that they would all soon submit to Assyria. Or he carried around a broken pot and told people that God was the potter and he was about to smash them and start all over. And yet, touchingly, at the end, as Jerusalem was falling, he bought a piece of land which he knew would be worthless. And he buried the deed in the ground in hope, saying, someday God will bring us back. Jeremiah is often called the prophet of gloom and doom because, well, the truth was he lived in a time that was a Holocaust. And the truth was he continued to speak because he believed that if the people would just turn around and return to God, then they would still be rescued from the disaster that was coming. But no one listened. And sometimes Jeremiah gets very angry that God makes him say the things that he has to say, whether he wants to or not. And the result was that for the most part, Jeremiah was hated, and he spent a good part of his life either in prison or running away from people who were trying to kill him. So I guess Jeremiah is the kind of prophet that might make us all ask, do I want to be liked? Do I want to keep the peace? Or do I want to be truthful and do the right thing even if it means I'm not going to be liked for it? Jeremiah also was famous for speaking of God's wrath and his anger, which is, something prophets often do. He told the people, he threatened them, he warned them that if they didn't change, God was going to punish them terribly. And I know for Christians, that's something we often struggle with, that picture of God. And in fact, sometimes people sort of stereotype the Bible and say, well, the Old Testament is about that sort of angry, wrathful God, and we Christians don't believe in that. While the New Testament is about love and grace. But I hope, as we've been surveying the Old Testament, that you see that there is also much love and much grace in the Old Testament. And it's all part of the same story. But Jeremiah and Isaiah 2 have a very strange way of seeing God's wrath and anger positively. Now that may sound weird, but I mean, how could you see God's wrath positively? But let me explain. In fact, I'll give you a hypothetical question. Imagine for a moment you're in your teens. You're a teenager again, or are a teenager. And let's face it, being in your teens is not an easy time. And you're asked this question as a teenager. Which would you prefer? Or which is worse? To do something very wrong, very inhuman, nasty, and have your parents find out, and have them yell at you and punish you for what you did, or to do something very wrong, inhuman, nasty, and have your parents find out, but they don't do anything, or even seem to care about it. Which would be worse? Even though no one likes to be punished, feeling ignored or abandoned or not even noticed can be worse, can it? Jeremiah saw horrible things. He saw the final destruction of Jerusalem, the Babylonians looting the temple, leveling. He saw horrible atrocities and slaughter. And as our lesson says today, the people of Judah had thought, this is God's temple, we are safe. God would never let anything happen to his temple. So how do you make sense of what happened? Especially when you are God's chosen people. How could God let this happen to his people? And they began to wonder, is he really there? Has he abandoned us? Maybe there is no God. Well, Jeremiah and the people of faith struggled to make sense of that. And Jeremiah came to believe that if God had just let this go on, let the people and the leadership of Judah continue in their terrible ways, if he had ignored their worship of other gods, if he had watched them burn their own children to Baal as sacrifices, then God would be blind, deaf, and dumb, and he really wouldn't be much of a God or really care, would he? But what has happened to you is proof there is a God, because he's punishing you, and you know it. And you deserve it. So it's kind of a strange message. But the exilic prophets say God's wrath is a proof of his existence. Because he has not forgotten his people. He's just angry with you and he's punishing your people. And you know he should be doing that and you deserve it. So God is not absent. In your very suffering you are experiencing his presence. It's just his wrath, but it's his presence, which is better than being abandoned. But the most important thing I want to share with you about Jeremiah is that he came to have a revolutionary understanding of faith for his day. It's clear from the very beginning of his book that he has an unusually deep and unusually personal faith with God. This is a God who touches Jeremiah's lips with his finger. This is a God who knows Jeremiah, whom Jeremiah knows and loves. And Jeremiah is so close to God that he speaks to him without any filters. No, God, forget it. I am too young. I don't want to talk for you. I'm not doing this. Don't ask me to do this. I don't want to do this. And there's a portion of Jeremiah called his Confessions, where we sense this deeply emotional, personal relationship that he has with God. In chapter 15, he says, "Alas, my mother, that you gave me birth, a man with whom the whole land strives and contends. I have neither lent nor borrowed, yet everyone curses me. But you understand me, O Lord. You remember me and care for me. You are long-suffering. Think of how I suffer reproach for your sake. When your words came to me, I ate them, and they were my joy and my heart's delight. For I bear your name, O Lord God Almighty. I never sat in the company of revelers, never made merry with them. I sat alone because your hand was on me, and you have filled me with indignation. Why is my pain unending, and my wound so grievous and incurable?" This was a kind of revolutionary faith, because a lot of Israel, in fact, most of Israel, thought that being a Jew, being one of God's people, was a cultural thing. It was a nation thing. It was kind of the way you lived your daily life kind of thing. And in fact, I have a really good friend who is a rabbi, and she's a rabbi for a very progressive Judaism that says our Judaism is about being Jewish. It's not about believing in God. And in fact, you can be an atheist and be a part of our synagogue, because it's not about God, it's about it being a Jewish cultural thing. Being part of a Jewish community and doing Jewish customs and rituals together. Well, do you see where I'm going? There are many people in Israel then, and there are many people who are religious today who see faith as religion. It's what you do. Christianity is going to church. Christianity is caring for your neighbor. Or sometimes I had one person who said, well, for me, Christmas is about the tree and the lights and the presents and being with family. I don't particularly believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that's not really important to me, but Christmas is about the family thing that we do together. Religion is the performance of certain acts, traditions, rituals, ethical imperatives. But Christianity at its heart is not a religion. It's a faith. Jeremiah said faith is a personal thing between he and God, between you and God. It's about loving God with your whole heart. That's personal. And not about the performance of certain things. And in fact, in chapter 31, Jeremiah gives this wonderful, I have a dream speech about faith. And he says, I look to the day when people will no longer have any rules of things they have to do or follow. There'll be no rules. Can you imagine a religion without rules? No rules, because God will write his love on our hearts. And we will just know what to do. And you know, that's really the same issue that surfaced during the Reformation, that revitalized the church, because the church had become ritualistic. In fact, you know, the church, everything it did was in Latin. Unless you were educated, you didn't even know what Latin was. You had no idea what the priest was saying throughout the entire service. Not even the sermon or the readings or anything. It was all in Latin. It's like a foreign language. So worship became going through the motions. And people lived in superstition and fear. And Luther rebelled against the worship of things and rituals. And he said that the heart of faith was knowing in your heart what Christ had done for you, and knowing how much Christ loved you, and then letting that love motivate the way you lived, which sometimes was completely outside of the box. And I think this is, for me, relevant today. Imagine for a minute what happened in Jeremiah. The temple, the church, was gone. No more church. No more temple. The people were scattered in exile in a foreign land. There was no more organized worship at all. No more church. No more kosher. No more celebrating Jewish holidays. In fact, they were outlawed in Babylon. If you read the book of Daniel, you see they were even made to eat pork and to publicly acknowledge the Babylonian gods. Their entire worship life was taken from them. And I think that leads kind of to an interesting thought. What would our faith look like if there was no church? If all the churches were gone? If all the vestiges of Christianity in society were dissolved? If all the pressure in society was to have nothing to do with anything Christian? What would your faith look like then? And often people say, well, the heart of my faith really isn't about church. It's just about doing good things for one another, and that's my faith. But the truth is, you don't need God for that. I mean, just go on the American Humanist website, and they will make it clear that religious people don't have a monopoly on doing wonderful things for other people. That you can do very wonderful things for other people, and it has nothing to do with God. So what's left? It's what Jeremiah experienced. That with all the externals gone, what's left is you and God. You and your relationship with God. What's in your heart. Jeremiah loved God deeply. And he invites us to think about what it would be like to live a life without any rules, without any external obligations, but to so deeply love God that you know what to do. Amen.